Welcome, you're on the Fringe show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday, 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to navigate the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here we discuss technology entrepreneurs and successful models, or rather mental models of successful people, so that you can too take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. Today is a bit of a milestone for me. It's my 20th show, and I've chosen to talk about Facebook and its corporate pivot to a metaverse that will be called Meta. It's a significant event in the tech industry. So the questions that we're going to explore today, or rather one central question is Meta a successor to the mobile internet as they claim, which combines all the elements of augmented and virtual and mixed reality? Or is it the worst invention of its time? And what does Meta mean for you and me and humanity generally? Let me just remind you, it's a live show, so please identify yourself and make sure that Facebook recognizes you. Just a little bit of a disclaimer before we go any further. I'm not your financial or investment advisor. It's not health advice either. This show is for educational and informational purposes only. And I will be using some quotes today because I want to quote some corporate papers from Facebook itself. But before we go into Facebook and their corporate pivot, let's investigate what a metaverse actually means. And this kind of material and these ideas are based on Matthew Ball. He's a VC. He's written recently an article talking about the metaverse and its characteristics and features. The metaverse as a term itself was coined by Neil Stevenson in 1992 in his sci-fi novel, which was called Snow Crash. And the term refers to a convergence of physical, augmented, and virtual reality in a shared online space. It's certainly not a very new idea. It's since the 70s and early 80s, perhaps, people in the technology community have imagined the future state of the internet, and they called it the metaverse. They said back then that it would revolutionize not just the infrastructure layer of the digital world, but much of the physical one, as well as the services and platforms, how they work and what they would sell. And the end state, apparently, of the metaverse is very lucrative. And because of that, the metaverse as an idea has become the newest macro goal for many of the world's tech giants. It is the driver certainly behind Facebook's purchase of Oculus VR, which happened in 2014. And I'll refer to that shortly in this episode. And so they newly announced Horizon Virtual World, or as a meeting place. Also, the tens of billions of dollars that have been pouring into cloud computing and particularly gaming over the next decade, it will also be based on the belief that such technologies will underpin our online and offline virtual future. So that will be a blend. What are some of the features of the metaverse, according to Matthew Ball? Firstly, it needs to be persistent. That means it will never reset or pause or end. It just continues indefinitely. It will be synchronous in life. So the metaverse will be a living experience, and it exists kind of almost consistently for everyone and in real time. It will be without any cap on the amount of users that can come to the metaverse, and provide each user with an individual sense of presence in this metaverse. It will be fully functioning economy. Individuals and businesses will be able to create, own, invest, sell, and be rewarded for an incredibly wide range of work that will be perceived of having some value in this metaverse. It will be an experience that spans both the digital and the physical world, the private and the public world, and the open and closed platforms as well. It will offer unprecedented interoperability of data, digital assets, content, and so on across all these different experiences. At the moment, our metaverses operate somewhat like a mall, where every store uses its own currency and requires proprietary ID, card and the proprietary units. So all of that will be interoperable in future. It will be populated by content and experiences created and operated by an incredibly wide range of contributors. These contributors will be coming from some commercially focused enterprises. Some of them will be independent individuals, and very often there will be informally organized groups. WEF, the World Economic Forum, has also got something to say about the metaverse. They have to be in just about anything. And so they said to a certain extent, this metaverse will be relying on non-fungible tokens. I have an episode about non-fungible tokens and what they are, so you may want to refer to that. So for them, that will be the foundation of value creation. And NFT, just to remind you, is a claim of ownership for a unique, non-interchangeable digital asset that is stored on the blockchain. And if NFTs become a commonly adopted tool for trading such goods, they could help accelerate to use mixed reality ecosystems as places people go to combine their physical existence with the digital existence, online life and offline lives as well. Now, let's that we understand what the metaverse is, go to Facebook itself and see how they came up with this idea. The word meta, the new corporate name for Facebook and its other properties, will be known as is coming from the Greek word beyond. Facebook at the moment has a lot of users. They currently worth $900 billion, and that's given half or almost half of US consumers say that they distrust Facebook, and it's according to a survey. During the first quarter of 2021, Facebook had something like 3.5 billion people using at least one of its core products, Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram or Messenger, that's each month. They're definitely targeting Gen Z, younger users, anybody from 18 to 29-year-olds, because at the moment they're not on Facebook. It's older generations that are using Facebook. And Meta was some time in the making. It's not a new idea for Facebook themselves. Facebook acquired Oculus, as I mentioned, back a while ago. And that was back in 2014. And Oculus VR was at the time the leader in VR, leading company. In announcing this Oculus purchase, Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg believed that VR will emerge as the next great computing platform after mobile and the communication platform as well. It's, again, not a new idea. In 2018, Oculus, or rather the executive of Oculus executive, Jason Rubin, sent an email to Facebook board member Mark Andreessen and attached a report to that. The headline of this email was the metaverse. And that report is in public domain and you can have a look at it. The paper now looks like very much the first draft of what Facebook is trying to implement right now. It imagined users floating through a digital universe of virtual ads, of course, and filled with virtual goods that people will buy. There will be virtual people that us users will marry, that's according to Jason Rubin, and they will be spending as little time as possible in the so-called meatverse. Meatverse refers to the real world where humans are flesh and blood, and maybe cattle, according to this executive as well. And just to give you a bit of a sense of what they were talking about, that's straight from this report, and it's an example of a fictitious user named Priya, how Priya gets married. So Priya visits the metaverse. She enters a virtual city equipped with a bowling alley, stores, theaters, and of course a Facebook pavilion described as the largest building, almost church-like in its dominance of the square. Priya can interact with others and use the metaverse currency to pay for her avatar's new hairstyle. Priya eventually meets another user who looks like a green and warty ogre. They end up getting married. But of course, why wouldn't you marry a green warty ogre? The only thing that she spends as much time doing as she spends in the metaverse is working, eating, socializing, and sleeping in the metaverse. Her entertainment time is spent more and more virtually. This is aided by Netflix, Facebook, Instagram, and other metaverse integrations. A decade into this hypothetical scenario, the document says the company's metaverse would reach something like 100 million hardware units sold, with 50% of that being Oculus branded, and the rest will be hardware from other hardware makers. So in July 2021, Zuckerberg made a few statements when he said that over the next several years, we will effectively transform, we meaning Facebook, we will effectively transform from people seeing us as primarily being a social media company to being a metaverse company. And Facebook will strive to build an interconnected set of experiences straight out of sci-fi. The company's division focused on products for communities, creators, commerce, and VR would increasingly work on realizing this vision. The software in which the metaverse will be built will be known as Meta Horizon. And in order to build this software, they will be employing 10,000 people across Europe over the next 5 years. So far, Facebook has allocated something like $10 billion to this project, so it's a significant amount of money. And with its resources and market power, the company could secure a monopoly position in this metaverse space. That's their vision, and also they're trying to get involved in this new technology right from the start. And if Zuckerberg has his way, then by 2030, the metaverse will have something like 1 billion users. So it's in 10 years period, we will have 1 billion users on Meta. In a very recent letter, and it was virtually written on the 28th of October, it's open letter of the founder to employees and other stakeholders as well. He explains why Facebook is changing. And he says, and I think we should all agree with that as an evolution of the internet and of the technology more generally, we went from desktop to web to mobile, now from text to photos to videos, and there is no limit, no end in this line. The next platform, he believes, will be even more immersive, what he calls an embodied internet, where you are in the experience as a user, you're there, and not just looking at it, you're living this experience. In his vision, the metaverse will not be created by one company. It will be built by creators and developers who make all these new experiences and digital items. These items are interoperable, and they unlock, according to him, a massively large creator economy that far beyond what's possible now these days. Now, it sounds like a very good promise to third-party developers and creators, but just be careful, and I talked about it in previous episodes, if you're a creator, that yes, at the beginning, all these big tech platforms are very welcoming to new creators, to developers, and then what happens when they have enough of the user base? Well, they rug pull, and they can change their rules at the drop of a hat. So be careful if you're building anything on Facebook. They're also talking, or rather, Mark Zuckerberg is also talking about privacy and safety that needs to be built into this metaverse from day one. I'll come to this very important point later on. And he's also talking about open standards and interoperability, so that some other developers can plug into Facebook or rather Meta and work with them. So that's the general vision. But in terms of technology, how is this going to work? Users will create their avatars in the virtual world that resemble their appearance in the real world. And the avatars will be as common as profile pictures on social media site, but instead of having a static image, there will be a living 3D representations of you. The upcoming social platform, Horizon, is an example of this. The avatar-based app will work in VR but Facebook also intends to work in augmented reality as well, and on regular laptops and mobiles. So they will be everywhere. There's no escaping Meta. VR is a lot of things right now, but it's not massively social because most people don't have VR headsets. They intend to penetrate your workspace, and quite a few companies are trying with this immersive workspace experience, creating virtual offices in VR. That's not really succeeding that much, but Facebook is going to try to do that. You will be able to transport yourself as a hologram to be at an office without actually having to commute. You can be at a concert with friends or in your parents' living room, trying to catch up with your parents. Your home will also be a place for the metaverse. Right now, there are lots of different apps that help you to create your virtual home, and there are plenty of apps to try, but there is no place, according to them, that you can truly call your home, because the technology apparently is not there yet. So that's the technology, the vision and the technology. What about the business model? How are they going to make money? And according to a lot of observers and analysts and technologists, there is a lot of money to be made in the metaverse. If anything, Second Life is a very good example. But within 2 decades, they envision time spent in the metaverse could rival the time that users used to spend on TV in the 90s and on Facebook in more recent years. And most importantly for Facebook, the net revenue after developer payout will be billions a year. That's according to the paper by Jason Rubin. The revenues will be coming from 2 places. One source of revenues will be the sale of virtual real estate and hats and weapons and all sorts of status symbols. So that's one source. The second source will be coming from, of course, ads, something that Facebook is very familiar with. Imagine Coca-Cola paying for prime placement of a pavilion, or maybe Procter & Gamble promising or promoting, rather, its brands on digital billboards. And given the amount of immersion, Rubin estimated that 100 million metaverse users could lead to more revenue than a real universe with 1 billion users. So let me repeat that: 100 million metaverse users will generate more money than billions of users right now. It seems like I'm losing my voice a little bit. I must be quite excited about it. How unique is metaverse, generally speaking? Well, it's not. There are many other companies that are vying for this interesting space, many technology firms, and that's Microsoft and Nvidia, Pokemon Go and Magic Leap and Tencent and Alibaba and Epic Games, that's Fortnite maker. They're all there. They have been talking about their own visions of the metaverse for quite some time. You probably, if you're a gamer, if you ever played virtual games, you would know a lot about Second Life that was developed by San Francisco-based Linden Labs back in 2003. And this is a multiplayer world which became a craze because it allowed users to create their own avatars, 3D avatars. They were allowed to socialize with others, play games, and explore all these beautiful multiple worlds called Sims. And I think what's interesting about Second Life is that it was a virtual online world which can be accessed through a personal computer. It also has a thriving marketplace where users can buy and sell merchandise, properties, services, and they're using virtual currency called Linden Dollar. Second Life's user base is quite significant, although it's not that huge. It's around 1 million active users. Microsoft is too betting on the metaverse. It's big on HoloLens, that's their holographic computer. And of course, there are multiple blockchain platforms like Xfinity and Decentraland and the Sandbox more recently. They're all building the architecture of virtual worlds for people to work, socialize, and coexist with the integration of non-fungible tokens and other facets of this crypto world. Now, that all sounds very exciting. Are there any things that we should be worried about? And the answer to this question is yes. And perhaps there is no better person to understand the world of virtual reality than the creator of the technology, VR pioneer, Jaron Lanier. He's considered to be arguably the father of VR. Jaron Lanier is a very interesting personality. He's an entrepreneur. He's also a computer scientist and musician and author. And according to him and many others in the space, the metaverse is probably the worst invention of the humankind. Lanier himself has been very early to this idea that social media and metaverse platforms were very addictive and even harmful. Their algorithms make people feel bad, really, divide them against one another, and actually change the way they are in a very insidious and threatening manner. Jaron Lanier himself is in the thick of it. He lives in Silicon Valley. He's worked there all his life. He is currently a computer scientist with Microsoft. He sold his startup to Google. He's really in the thick of it, as he says, but he's very publicly against the business models of a Web 2.0 companies that use us as the products. You probably haven't heard about Jaron Lanier, and that's because he's not on social media. But nevertheless, he's a very respected author. He's published a few books, and one of them is Who Owns the Future, that I really highly recommend. And there are a couple of quotes that I would like to refer you to, and that's coming from Jaron Lanier. He was asked to comment on the purchase of Oculus VR by Facebook back in 2014. And this is what he's got to say here. We've known for a very long time that it's possible to use virtual reality in extremely creepy ways. There's been a team in fiction for longer than computers have existed. And then he goes on to say, it's not hard to imagine a scenario in which you have most people who are materially at a disadvantage compared to the elite, sort of living in simulations for the benefit of the elite. That could come about. I don't think it will, because I think people are better than that and smarter than that and kinder than that. But in order to avoid it, we should talk about it, which is why I talk about it. Virtual reality is particularly usable in creepy ways because you could get such intimate data about people and do such intimate things to people. By suddenly changing a person's avatar, you can change how they feel about themselves, how effective they are, how confident they are. You can affect how they treat other people. You can really manipulate people because it's so close to the bone and so close to the brain. I think what Jaron Lanier is saying here unequivocally, it's a mind-altering or mind-control technology even. Now, if you're a business owner, just a question to you guys, what are the concerns for business for you? Any business will have to pay very close attention to the data that's going to Facebook. Will you as a business owner be comfortable with having to use a Facebook or Meta login for all your operations? And I think businesses are hesitant at this point in time to buy into this vision, having to go all in Facebook and fully sign to its ecosystem, but time will show. And then there are aspects that nobody really talks about, but they should be talked about. And these are legal issues around all these metaverses that applies to not just to Facebook, but actually to all metaverses out there. So legal issues is one, and the other one is mental rights. And let's talk through that. Oculus headsets, as it appears to be, are not compliant with the federal law, US federal law I'm referring to, around privacy for education. And some applications are not compliant with the health regulators. So Facebook are making a lot about, we're using VR for education. Well, they actually can't because it violates at the moment the law, the federal law. And there is a lot of rhetoric that Meta is prioritizing privacy and safety and interoperability. Great. But their definition of privacy is coming actually from 1973's Code of Fair Information Practices. It's an old code. The FCC is regulating privacy in that as long as you consent to having things shared, then everything is okay. Well, that concept of privacy is almost 50 years old. They're not really updating it. And Facebook is saying that the information that they're using is going to be contextually relevant to what they're doing. And because they're leaning so heavily into making things economically sustainable, because ads is how they make their money at the moment, they're actually trading your privacy. And then comes the question of neural rights, which is a very, very important question. Neural rights is something that's proposed by a group of researchers led by Raphael Yusta, University of Columbia. I hope I pronounce his name correctly. And they propose these 5 neural rights. The first is right to identity, or the ability to control one's physical and mental integrity. And by the way, the reason that they're doing this is that they say we need new human rights for the age of neurotechnology. We're all surrounded by neurotechnology, but we don't understand their rights. So our rights. So first thing, the right to identity. The second right is the right to agency, or the freedom of thought and free will to choose one's own actions. Number 3 is the right to mental privacy, or the ability to keep thoughts protected against disclosure. Number 4 is the right to fair access to mental augmentation. And finally, number 5 is the right to protection from algorithmic bias. And now let's have a look how Facebook's metaverse and other metaverses, for that matter, stack against these rights. With mental privacy, eventually the technology is going to be so good that by they, I mean the creators of the metaverses, will understand what you're thinking. They will understand what you're thinking. They're essentially reading your mind, and you have no privacy in terms of disclosing what you're thinking. If you can understand someone's thinking, then you can hack their action patterns, and you can undermine your own free will. If they're tackling all this information about who you are, they're creating a digital twin of your identity. And they're looking at all of that through the lens of this act that was 1973. It's a very old act. And because it's such a new technology, what are the norms? Well, we don't know. We're creating the norms as we speak. And I think it's time for some parting thoughts about meta and metaverses, generally speaking. Are there any positive developments here? I think, if anything, then Facebook's corporate pivot will possibly benefit the crypto industry. Many metaverse projects will receive more and more of the attention, like Centraland, Sandbox, but also it may probably benefit Ethereum, if we believe that digital property rights to digital assets will be built on Ethereum. The analysts are saying that the metaverse is not going to be, the whole metaverse is not going to be wholly owned and orchestrated by Mark Zuckerberg of Meta. There are other contenders as well. If you're a business owner, I really urge you to think about, well, are you okay for Meta to have access to your data through one single digital identity? And my questions to public servants and governments as well. Are you happy with this? It's you, at least for now, not Facebook, who can legitimately issue an identity. And we can't, I think, delegate it to a private company that will create our digital twin, if you will. If you're a young person, I seriously urge you to think about that. Tech elites continue to own the world's real assets. They own land, particularly farmland, they own forests and lakes and real estate and businesses and precious metals. And you, my friends, are supposed to own virtual assets. As they say, you will own nothing and be happy. That's according to the World Economic Forum by 2030. That's some interesting kind of coincidence of of the timeline from Facebook when they will have these billions of users and the World Economic Forum agenda. If you're a lawyer out there, get your hands dirty. They, and by they I mean Facebook and other metaverse builders, are after our children and our teens. It's a mind-altering technology in plain sight. My personal view on this is that Silicon Valley and most of Silicon Valley, not all of them, of course, and the tech elites are in their own bubble. It's a misreading of where the world is heading, and it's very much a distraction from the world that we live in today. But maybe that's what they're really trying to do. Will real physical life will stay with us for a while? I mean, the meatverse versus meta and metaverses. I recently run a very unscientific poll of my students because we're discussing a case that was related to Facebook. And so the subject of metaverse came up, and we talked about that a little while. And I asked them, after showing them their dress, Zuckerberg's dress, and a short video, well, do you imagine yourself living in a world like that? And they looked at me like, what is this professor talking about? And in the end, they all said, no, we don't want a world like that. We want to live in a physical world. Yeah, we're a little bit curious. We may visit it, but we don't want to live in that particular world. And that's, by the way, your target audience. I teach people who are really young people in their 20s, early 20s. And finally, my final and parting thought is this, and it's more so a quote from one of my favorite analysts, Catherine Austin Fitts. She says that we finance the world we want to live in. So do you want to finance this dystopian parallel reality as if we're already not living in a matrix? So I want you to ponder on all of these issues that I've raised. And thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. I shall see you on the Fringe show next Friday, 2 p.m. Dubai time. And now it's time for a little music, for a bit of music.